Welcome back, sweet dreamers, to the adventures of Peter Pan by Pumpkin Stories. In this series we will read through the whole book by James Matthew Barrie. Now relax and get ready to dive back into Neverland. Chapter 4. The Flight. Second to the right and straight on till morning. That, Peter had told Wendy, was the way to the Neverland, but even birds carrying maps and consulting them at windy corners could not have sighted it with these instructions. Peter, you see, just said anything that came into his head. At first, his companions trusted him implicitly, and so great were the delights of flying that they wasted time circling round church spires or any other tall object on the way that looked their fancy. John and Michael raced, Michael getting a start. They recalled with contempt that not so long ago they had thought themselves fine fellows for being able to fly around the room. Not long ago, but how long ago? They were flying over the sea before this thought began to disturb Wendy seriously. John thought it was their second sea and their third night. Sometimes it was dark and sometimes light, and now they were very cold and again too warm. Did they really feel hungry at times, or were they merely pretending because Peter had such a jolly new way of feeding them? His way was to pursue birds who had food in their mouths, suitable for humans, and snatch it from them. Then the birds would follow and snatch it back, and they would all go chasing each other gaily for miles, parting at last with mutual expressions of goodwill. But Wendy noticed with gentle concern that Peter did not seem to know what this was, rather an odd way of getting your bread and butter, nor even that there were other ways. Certainly they did not pretend to be sleepy. They were sleepy, and there was a danger, for the moment they popped off, down they fell. The awful thing was that Peter thought this funny. "There he goes again," he would cry gleefully as Michael suddenly dropped like a stone. "Save him! Save him!" cried Wendy, looking with horror at the cruel sea far below. Eventually Peter would dive through the air and catch Michael just before he could strike the sea, and it was lovely the way he did it. But he always waited till the last moment, and you felt it was his cleverness that interested him and not the saving of human life. Also he was fond of variety, and the sport that engrossed him one moment would suddenly cease to engage him. So there was always the possibility that the next time you fell he would let you go. He could sleep in the air without falling, by merely lying on his back and floating, but this was, partly at least, because he was so light that if you got behind him and blew, he went faster. "Do be more polite to him," Wendy whispered to John when they were playing. "Follow my leader." "Then tell him to stop showing off," said John. When playing Follow My Leader, Peter would fly close to the water and touch each shark's tail in passing, just as in the street you may run your finger along an iron railing. They could not follow him in this with much success, so perhaps it was rather like showing off, especially as he kept looking behind to see how many tails they missed. "You must be nice to him," Wendy impressed on her brothers. "What could we do if we were to leave us?" We could go back, Michael said. How could we ever find our way back without him? Well, then we could go on, said John. That is the awful thing, John. We should have to go on, for we don't know how to stop. This was true. Peter had forgotten to show them how to stop. John said that if the worst came to the worst, all they had to do was just go straight on, for the world was round, and so in time they must come back to their own window. And who is to get food for us, John? I nipped a bit of that eagle's mouth pretty neatly, Wendy. After the 20th try, Wendy remembered him. And even though we became good at picking up food, see how we bump against clouds and things if he is not near to us to give a hand. Indeed, they were constantly bumping. They could not fly strongly, though they still kicked far too much. But if they saw a cloud in front of them, the more they tried to avoid it, the more certainly they did bump into it. If Nana had been with them, she would have had a bandage around Michael's forehead by this time. Peter was not with them for the moment, and they felt rather lonely up there by themselves. He could go so much faster than they that he would suddenly shoot out of sight to have some adventure in which they had no share. He would come down laughing over something fearfully funny he had been saying to a star, but he had already forgotten what it was. Or he would come up with a mermaid's scales still sticking to him, and yet not to be able to say for certain what had been happening. It was really rather irritating to the children who had never seen a mermaid. And if he forgets them so quickly, Wendy argued, how can we expect that he will go on remembering us? Indeed, sometimes when he returned, he did not remember them, at least not well. Wendy was sure of it. She saw recognition come into his eyes as he was about to pass them the day of and go on. Once even she had to call him by name. "I'm Wendy," she said agitatedly. He was very sorry. "I say, Wendy," he whispered to her. "Always if you see me forgetting you, just keep on saying, 'I'm Wendy,' and I'll remember." Of course, this was rather unsatisfactory. However, to make amends, he showed them how to lie out flag on a strong wind that was going their way, and this was such a pleasant change that they tried it several times and found that they could sleep thus with security. Indeed, they would have slept longer, but Peter tired quickly of sleeping, and soon he would cry in his captain voice, "We get off here!" So, with occasional tiffs, but on the whole rollicking, they drew near the Neverland, for after many moons they did reach it. And, what is more, they had been going pretty straight all the time, not perhaps so much owing to the guidance of Peter or Tink, as because the island was looking for them. It is only thus that anyone may sight those magic shores. "There it is," said Peter calmly. "Where? Where?" "Where all the arrows are pointing." Indeed, 1,000,000 golden arrows were pointing it out to the children, all directed by their friend the sun, who wanted them to be sure of their way before leaving them for the night. Wendy and John and Michael stood on tiptoe, in the air to get the first sight of the island. Strange to say, they all recognized it at once, and until fear fell upon them, they hailed it, not as something long dreamt of and seen at last, but as a familiar friend to whom they were returning home for the holidays. "John, there's the lagoon. Wendy, look at the turtle burying the eggs in the sand." I say, "John, I see your flamingo with the broken leg." "Look, Michael, there's your cave." "John, what's that in the brushwood?" "It's a wolf with her whelps." "Wendy, I do believe that's your little whelp." "There's my boat, John, with her side stove in." "No, it isn't. Why, we burned your boat." "That's her, at any rate. I say, John, I see the smoke of the Redskin camp." "Where?" "Show me, and I'll tell you by the way smoke curls whether they are on the warpath." "There, just across the mysterious river." "I see now. Yes, they are on the warpath right enough." Peter was a little annoyed with them for knowing so much, but if he wanted to lord it over them, his triumph was at hand. "For have I not told you that anon fear fell upon them?" "It came as the arrows went, leaving the island in gloom. In the old days at home, the Neverland had always begun to look a little dark and threatening by bedtime. Then unexplored patches arose in it and spread. Black shadow moved about in them. The roar of the beasts of prey was quite different now, and above all, you lost the certainty that you would win. You were quite glad that the night lights were on. You even liked Nana to say that this was just the mantelpiece over here, and that Neverland was all make-believe. Of course, the Neverland had been make-believe in those days, but it was real now, and there were no night lights, and it was getting darker every moment. And where was Nana? They had been flying apart, but they huddled close to Peter now. His careless manner had gone at last. His eyes were sparkling, and a tingle went through them every time they touched his body. They were now over the fearsome island, flying so low that sometimes a tree grazed their feet. Nothing horrid was visible in the air, yet their progress had become slow and labored, exactly as if they were pushing their way through hostile forces. Sometimes they hung in the air until Peter had beaten on with his fists. "They don't want us to land," he explained. "Who are they?" Wendy whispered, shuddering. But he could not, or would not say. Tinkerbell had been asleep on his shoulder, but now he wakened her and sent her on in front. Hope you enjoyed this part. See you all on the next, and until then, good night and sweet dreams by Pumpkin Stories.